My name is Shirley. For 25 years, I was married to Eugene Blackwood, the celebrated novelist. The man whose literary genius was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones at every cocktail party and awards dinner from Manhattan to London. To the world, he was a titan of letters. To me, he was the man who would critique the way I loaded the dishwasher with the same condescending sigh he used to dismiss a manuscript. For 25 years, I was his shadow, his support system, his glorified assistant, who also happened to run a moderately successful literary agency. An agency he once encouraged, then tolerated, and finally, openly pitied. My career, he said during one of his carefully curated dinner parties, had become stagnant. It was a quiet, reliable stream, while he, Eugene, was a roaring river. And then he found his new ocean. Her name was Lena. She was 22 years old, with eyes that held a galaxy of unshed tears and a manuscript that he claimed was the most explosive, raw piece of writing he'd seen in a generation. She was his protégée, his discovery, his brilliant young writer. He left me for her. He announced it over a breakfast of burnt toast and imported marmalade, the cruelty of it all so casual it felt like he was discussing the weather. He said he was starting a new life, a more authentic one, with a talent that matched his own. And to prove his devotion, he used every ounce of his considerable influence, every connection I had helped him build, to secure her a massive, life-altering book deal. He was going to make her the next big thing. He had no idea, not a single clue, that Lena was the daughter I gave up for adoption 23 years ago. He didn't know that we had reconnected last year, two strangers bound by blood and a shared history of being discarded. He didn't know that this entire tragic, romantic narrative of the great novelist and his young muse was a lie. It was our idea. A story we wrote together. His praise, his connections, his reputation, and his money, every last drop of it, is now flowing directly to the daughter he never knew I had. And this is the story of how we took it all. The end came not with a bang, but with the clink of a silver spoon against a porcelain cup. It was a Tuesday morning. The main sunlight, usually so gentle and forgiving as it streamed into our kitchen, seemed harsh and interrogative that day, exposing the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent accusations. Eugene sat opposite me at our heavy oak table, a table I'd picked out at an antique fair 2 decades ago, a table where we'd celebrated triumphs and weathered arguments. He hadn't looked at me, not really, for the entire meal. His eyes were fixed on a point just over my shoulder, as if contemplating a future in which I was already absent. He cleared his throat, a dry, theatrical sound he used before making a pronouncement. "Surely," he began, his voice laced with that infuriating tone of weary patience, as if I were a particularly dense student. "We need to talk about the state of things." I knew what was coming. I had felt it in the air for months, a change in barometric pressure that signaled an approaching storm. It was in the way he started staying late at the university where he was a writer in residence, the way his phone was perpetually angled away from me, the way he spoke of Lena. Always Lena. "Her name is Lena," he had said a few weeks prior, after returning from a workshop. He'd tossed his tweed jacket, the one with the worn leather elbow patches, onto a chair. "You have to read her work, Shirley. It's primal. It's what I was trying to do with my first novel, but she's actually done it. No artifice. I, a literary agent for over 2 decades, had offered to read it. It was my job, after all. Let me take a look," I'd said, my voice even. "I can see if she's got what it takes." He'd actually laughed, a short, dismissive bark. "Oh no, no, this isn't for your little agency. This is real literature. It needs a real champion. It needs me." The memory of that sting was still fresh as I watched him across the table. "The state of things, Eugene?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I was clinging to the handle of my coffee mug like a life raft. The mug was chipped, a small crescent missing from the rim. It was his favorite, the one he claimed had the perfect heft. Us, he gestured vaguely between us with his spoon, as if our 25-year marriage was a piece of unappetizing food on his plate. "It's run its course. It's become stagnant." There was that word again. Stagnant. He'd used it to describe my career, my taste in art, my contribution to dinner party conversations. Now it was being applied to our entire life together. It was a brand he seared onto anything he no longer had use for. "I've fallen in love, Shirley," he continued, and for the first time he met my gaze. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held no apology, only a chilling sort of resolve. "With Lena. It's not something I planned, it just happened. A meeting of minds, a fire I haven't felt in years." I felt the air leave my lungs. The kitchen, with its familiar scent of coffee and old wood, suddenly felt alien, like a meticulously constructed stage set, where I no longer knew my lines. "She's a child, Eugene. She's 22. She's a woman. And a genius," he corrected, his voice sharp. "And unlike some people, she isn't afraid to take risks. She's not content with a safe, predictable life." The barb was aimed directly at me, and it hit its mark. My agency specialized in commercial fiction, bestsellers that paid the bills, that funded this very house, his writing retreats, his collection of first editions. It was a source of endless quiet shame for him. He wanted to be married to an esoteric poet, or a fiery academic, not someone who sold thrillers and romance novels by the truckload. "So you're leaving," I stated. It wasn't a question. "I am," he said. He placed the spoon down with a definitive click. "I'm moving into the cottage on campus for now. Lena and we're going to be together, and I'm going to make sure she gets the career she deserves. I've already spoken to my editor at Pantheon. They're offering her a 2-book deal, a significant one." He said the word significant, with a smug satisfaction, a king bestowing a great gift. He was using his power, the power I had helped him build by managing his contracts, his publicity, his entire life, to launch the career of the woman he was leaving me for. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was a physical blow. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt a strange and terrifying calm settle over me, a layer of ice forming over a turbulent sea. I just nodded. What was I supposed to do? What was I supposed to say? The script had already been written, and I was being written out of it. He stood up, looking relieved that I wasn't making a scene. "I'll have my lawyer send over the paperwork. Let's try to be civilized about this, Shirley. For old time's sake." He walked out of the kitchen without a backward glance. I listened to his footsteps on the hardwood floors, the opening and closing of the front door, the sound of his vintage Saab roaring to life, and then fading down the long gravel driveway. I sat there for a long time, staring at the chipped coffee mug. The coffee inside had gone cold, stagnant, and in that profound echoing silence of the house we had built together, a single clear thought rose to the surface. He has no idea who he's dealing with. Not anymore. The hours that followed his departure are a blur of numbing mechanical actions. I cleared the breakfast dishes, placing his cup in the dishwasher with a little more force than necessary. I walked through the house, a sprawling coastal Maine home that had once been my pride and joy, and saw it for what it now was. A museum of a dead marriage. His books were everywhere, lining shelves from floor to ceiling, stacked on side tables, spilling from boxes in his study. His face, brooding and intellectual, stared out from the covers. Eugene Blackwood. The name was a brand, a monument to his ego. By evening the icy calm had shattered, and the grief I'd been holding back flooded in. It was a raw, physical pain, a hollow ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I curled up on the sofa in the living room, the one he always complained was too soft, and I let myself fall apart. I cried for the young woman I had been, the one who had fallen for a charming, brilliant writer who saw her as his equal. I cried for the 25 years I had invested, the endless support, the quiet sacrifices, the belief that we were a team. I cried because the betrayal was so profoundly deep. It felt like he had reached into my chest and scooped out my heart. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a persistent, irritating sound. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally I reached for it, my hand shaking. It was my best friend, Carol. She was a senior editor at a rival publishing house in New York, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had seen through Eugene's charm from day one. "Heard you had some fireworks up there in Maine," she said, her voice devoid of pity. which was exactly what I needed. The literary gossip wire is buzzing. Eugene Blackwood has left his long-suffering wife for his 22-year-old prodigy. How are you? Stagnant, I croaked, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Don't you dare use his word, she snapped. He's an emotional vampire, surely. He drained you dry and is now looking for a fresh source. You're better off. It doesn't feel like it, I whispered, tears blurring the polished surface of the table in front of me. He gave her a book deal, Carol, with Pantheon. He's taking everything we built and just handing it to her. I know. The advance is rumored to be north of $500,000 for a debut. It's obscene. He's leveraging his own next contract to guarantee it. The whole industry is talking about his colossal ego. That information was a fresh stab of pain. My authors, talented writers I'd nurtured for years, fought for scraps, for five-figure advances, and he had just handed this girl, this child, a fortune on a silver platter. It was in that moment, talking to Carol, that the grief began to curdle. It started to mix with something else, something harder and colder. Rage. A deep, righteous anger that had been simmering for years, under a placid surface of accommodation and compromise. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. At that moment, it was simply about survival. After I hung up with Carol, I forced myself to get up. I walked into his study, the hallowed ground where the great Eugene Blackwood crafted his masterpieces. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and his cloying pipe tobacco. His desk was a mess of papers, notes for his next novel, and a framed photo. It was of him and Lena, standing on the university quad, both of them beaming. He looked revitalized. She looked exactly like me at that age. The same dark wavy hair, the same determined set of her jaw, the same vulnerability in her eyes. Seeing her face, really looking at it, sent me spiraling back in time. Back 23 years, to a cold, sterile hospital room. I was 19, a scholarship student at NYU, with a future I was terrified of losing. I was alone. The father, a fleeting romance with another student, was long gone. I remember holding her, a tiny perfect bundle wrapped in a thin hospital blanket. She had a full head of dark hair. I named her Alina, a name I'd always loved, but I wrote Lena on the form, a nickname that felt more modern, more hopeful. The social worker was kind but firm. This was the best thing, she'd said. She would have a good life, a life with 2 parents, a stable home. I signed the papers with a hand that trembled so hard, the signature was nearly illegible. Giving her up was the hardest thing I had ever done, a wound that had never truly healed, just scarred over. It was my secret, a private grief I had carried through my entire adult life. I had never even told Eugene. In our early, more intimate days, I'd considered it, but the moment never felt right. He was so focused on his own narrative, his own carefully constructed past. My messy, painful history didn't fit, so I kept it buried. Life went on. I finished my degree, got a job as an assistant at a literary agency, and met Eugene at a book launch. He was dazzling, quoting poets, and holding my hand a little too long. He loved that I was in his world, but not a direct competitor. I was a book person, he'd say, which was a compliment at first. We married, moved to Maine, and I poured my energy into his career and my own growing agency. The scar over my heart remained, a dull ache that would flare up on her birthday each year. Then, a little over a year ago, everything changed. I received a letter. It was from a service that connects adoptees with their birth parents. My daughter Lena was looking for me. My hands shook as I read her words. She wasn't angry, she was just curious. She wanted to know who I was, where she came from. We exchanged emails, then tentative phone calls. Finally, we agreed to meet. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Boston, halfway between her university and my home. The moment she walked in, I knew. It was like looking at a ghost of my younger self. She had the same walk, the same way of tilting her head when she was listening. We talked for hours. She told me about her adoptive parents, good, kind people who had given her a wonderful life. She told me she was an English major, that she wanted to be a writer. The irony was not lost on me. Our connection was immediate and profound. It was a bond forged in loss and rediscovered in hope. We met secretly over the next few months, rebuilding a bridge across 22 years of silence. I told her about my life, my career, and eventually about Eugene. I told her about his genius, but also about his ego, his casual cruelty, the way he had slowly diminished me over the years, until I felt like a footnote in my own life. She listened, her intelligent eyes full of a fierce protective anger on my behalf. She saw the dynamic with a clarity I had lost. Now standing in his study, staring at the photo of him with my daughter, the daughter he thought was his discovery, the final piece clicked into place. His betrayal wasn't just about another woman, it was about narrative. He had replaced my story with hers. He had cast me as the stagnant past, and her as the brilliant future. I picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't call Carol, I dialed a number that was saved under a code name. She picked up on the second ring. "Mom," Lena's voice was cautious. "Is everything okay? I saw the article online, about the book deal. He actually did it." "He did it," I said, my voice low and steady. The tears were gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. "He left me this morning, he told me everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh Mom, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," I said, a strange fierce energy surging through me. I looked around Eugene's study, at the monuments to his own greatness. "Lena, do you remember what we talked about that night in Boston? After I told you about how he treats me, about how he belittles my work. We were joking, sort of, about what would happen if he ever met you, if he didn't know who you were." "I remember," she said slowly. "I said he'd probably fall in love with my writing, and try to take all the credit." "He has," I said. "He's done exactly that. He's putting his entire reputation on the line for you. He's tying his finances to you." I took a deep breath. The idea that had been a dark hypothetical joke was now a tangible gleaming weapon lying right in front of me. It wasn't about revenge before, Lena. I was just hurt. But now it is. The question is, are you with me? There was another long silence. I could hear her breathing, could picture her in her dorm room, surrounded by books, processing the enormity of what I was suggesting. This was no small thing. It was a declaration of war. "Mom," she finally said, and her voice was no longer that of a worried daughter. It was the voice of an ally. It was firm, and it was cold. "He called your career stagnant. He hurt you for years. He has no idea what you're capable of. He has no idea what we're capable of. So yes, I'm with you. What do we do first?" A slow smile spread across my face. It was the first time I had smiled all day. "First," I said, my eyes landing on the first draft of his new novel sitting on his desk, "you're going to need a better manuscript. And I know just how to shape it." The plan in its infancy was beautiful in its simplicity. It would use Eugene's own fatal flaws, his monumental ego, his intellectual vanity, and his professional jealousy, as the very tools of his undoing. He saw himself as Pygmalion, the master sculptor, who could shape a raw talent into a masterpiece. We would let him believe it. We would give him the most perfect block of marble he had ever seen, and let him carve his own ruin. The first step was the manuscript. Lena was, as Eugene had blindly guessed, a genuinely gifted writer. Her prose was sharp, her voice authentic, but her first draft was what any first draft is: promising but flawed. It was sprawling, emotionally raw, and lacked a tight commercial structure. As an agent, I saw its potential immediately. But I also saw how to refine it, not just into a good book, but into a perfect trap. Over the next few weeks, Lena and I worked in secret. She would take the train down from her university on weekends, and we would lock ourselves in my home office, the one Eugene had always called my little hobby room, and we would deconstruct and rebuild her novel, sentence by sentence. "He needs to see himself in this," I explained, circling a paragraph on a printed page. "His early work was all about the lone, misunderstood male protagonist fighting against a conformist world. We need to give him that, but from a female perspective. It will feel both familiar and revolutionary to him. He'll think you're his intellectual heir." Lena was a quick study, so I make the protagonist an artist, a writer. "Better," I said, a thrill running through me. Make her a musician, a composer. It's still art, but it's a world he doesn't know intimately. He can't nitpick the technical details. He can only pontificate on the soul of it. It's the perfect bait for a man who loves the sound of his own voice. We wove in themes that would speak directly to his vanity. We researched his favorite authors, Camus Faulkner, a touch of early Roth, and sprinkled in allusions he would recognize, little literary Easter eggs that would make him feel like only he was smart enough to discover them. We sharpened the dialogue, tightened the plot, and polished every sentence until the manuscript gleamed. It was still Lena's book, her story, her soul, but I was the master strategist, turning it into a guided missile aimed directly at the heart of Eugene's ego. While we worked on the creative front, I was also laying the groundwork for the legal and financial trap. My conversation with Carol had been a godsend. Knowing that Eugene was guaranteeing Lena's advance against his own future earnings was the key. Now I had to make sure that guarantee was ironclad and inescapable. This required a new ally. I couldn't use my own lawyer. It would be too suspicious. Through Carol, I got a discreet recommendation for a shark of a contract lawyer in Boston, a woman named Isabella Rossi, who was known for her intricate and merciless work in intellectual property. I met Isabella in her sleek, minimalist office overlooking the Boston Harbor. I laid out a hypothetical scenario. Imagine, I said, a young, unknown author is being offered a huge deal by a major publisher. The deal is being championed and financially guaranteed by a very famous, very established author. What kind of clauses would you, as the young author's representative, insist on to protect her interests? Isabella, a woman with piercing eyes and an impeccably tailored suit, leaned forward, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Protection is one thing. Leverage is another. Which do you want? I want leverage, I said, without hesitation. She smiled. I like you, she said. Okay. First, the advance. We make it non-recoupable against her own earnings, but fully recoupable against the guarantors, standard enough for a deal like this. But we add a kicker, an acceleration clause. If the guarantor's next book is delayed or fails to meet its own contractual delivery date, the publisher has the right to claim the entire guaranteed sum immediately from his other assets. My heart hammered in my chest. He's always late with his manuscripts, I murmured. He calls it part of his process. Perfect, Isabella purred. Next, rights reversion. This is the beauty part. The standard clause is that if the book goes out of print, the rights revert to the author. We're going to change that. We'll draft a custom clause. The rights, including all subsidiary rights, film, foreign, audio, revert to the author, free and clear, if the guarantor defaults on any part of his financial obligation to the publisher. The publisher would be furious, but if the guarantor is pushing hard enough for the deal, he'll tell his own people to just make it happen. Egos make people stupid with contracts. It was diabolical. It was perfect. If Eugene stumbled even slightly, if his own creative process faltered, the entire financial structure would collapse on him, and Lena would walk away with her book and all the money. There's one more thing, Isabella added. The agent, the famous author, will want his own agent to handle it, to take a commission. We refuse. The girl insists on having her own legal counsel review and sign. She's a savvy young artist, protecting her work. It's a good look. He'll see it as a sign of her brilliance, not a red flag. I paid Isabella a hefty retainer, all in cash from a separate account I'd maintained for years. My running away fund, I'd jokingly called it. It didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt like an arsenal. I coached Lena relentlessly, not just on the book, but on the persona. Just on the book, but on the persona. We rehearsed conversations. I taught her how to flatter Eugene, how to quote his own work back to him, how to ask for his wisdom on a difficult chapter. Make him feel like your savior, I instructed her over a clandestine dinner. Men like Eugene don't want a partner, they want a disciple. Your independence will threaten him later. For now you need to be the clay he is desperate to mold. Lena, to her immense credit, was a natural actress. She had a quiet intensity that people mistook for shyness, but it was really a careful, observant intelligence. She absorbed every lesson. The final piece of the plan involved a third party, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was another critically acclaimed novelist, a contemporary of Eugene's. They had come up through the ranks together, but Eugene's commercial success had always eclipsed Marcus's more modest literary sales. There was a bitter rivalry between them, mostly on Marcus's side. Eugene barely considered him a peer. I knew Marcus had recently started his own prestigious imprint at a competing publisher, looking for exciting new voices. He was the perfect person to be waiting in the wings. I sent him an anonymous email from a Proton Mail account. The subject line was "What Pantheon is Missing." Inside was just the first 50 pages of Lena's polished manuscript. No name, no context. Just the work. I knew a writer like Marcus wouldn't be able to resist. It was a seed planted in fertile, resentful soil. Carol was my nervous, reluctant co-conspirator. I had to tell her the whole truth about Lena being my daughter. She was stunned into a rare silence. We were sitting in her apartment in the city, surrounded by stacks of books and manuscripts. "My God, Shirley," she finally breathed, her hand over her mouth. This is biblical. A Shakespearean-level plot." "It's a publishing strategy, Carol," I said coolly. "Nothing more." "Don't you lie to me," she said, her eyes searching mine. "This is a revenge fantasy made real. Are you sure you know what you're doing? You're using your own daughter as a weapon." Her words hit a nerve. It was the one part of the plan that gave me pause in the dead of night. Was I manipulating Lena? Was I poisoning our new fragile relationship with the acid of my own bitterness? It was a debatable choice. I knew that. My own logic felt both airtight and monstrous. This wasn't just for me. It was for Lena too. Eugene was a gatekeeper, a man who decided who was worthy. By taking him down, we were breaking open the gates. I was giving my daughter the career and financial security I could never have given her as a terrified 19-year-old. I was using the wreckage of my life to build the foundation of hers. "He took 25 years from me, Carol," I said, my voice quiet. "He was going to take her future and twist it into a monument to himself. This isn't me using her. This is us together, taking back our power. He thinks he's writing her story. He has no idea she's writing his." Carol sighed, shaking her head. "Okay. I'm in. I don't like it, but I've seen what that man did to you for 2 decades. He has it coming. What do you need from me?" "Information," I said. "I need to know what they're saying inside Pantheon. I need to know when Eugene's agent pushes back on the contract, and how hard." "I can do that," she said. "I have a friend in their legal department. I'll see what I can find out." With all the pieces in place, the manuscript, the lawyer, the persona, the rival in the wings, the friend on the inside, all that was left was for the trap to be sprung. It was time for Lena to officially meet the great Eugene Blackwood. We chose the setting carefully, a summer writers' conference in the Berkshires, where Eugene was the keynote speaker. It was neutral ground, public, and filled with the kind of literary sycophants he adored. It was the perfect stage for the first act of our play. Lena enrolled as a student. I bought a ticket as a regular attendee, ready to watch from the shadows. The moment of their meeting was a masterpiece of calculated chance. Lena positioned herself near the stage after Eugene's keynote address, a speech filled with his usual platitudes about suffering for one's art. She was holding a well-worn copy of his first novel. As he descended the steps, basking in the applause, she accidentally dropped her tote bag, spilling a few books at his feet. One of them was his. He of course stopped. It was a perfect damsel in distress moment, tailored for his heroic self-image. "Whoa there," he said, stooping to help her. His eyes lit up when he saw his own book in her hand. "A fan of the early stuff, I see." "It's my favorite," Lena said, her voice breathy with practiced awe. "It's the reason I started writing." It was a line we had rehearsed a dozen times, and it landed perfectly. Eugene's chest visibly puffed out. He was hooked. They spoke for 20 minutes, oblivious to the crowd swirling around them. I watched from the back of the auditorium, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I saw him take her number. I saw the way he looked at her, not with lust, but with something far more dangerous, a sense of ownership. He had found his Galatea. The next phase unfolded exactly as we'd predicted. He showered her with attention. He read her manuscript in one night, and called her at dawn, raving about it. He called it a bolt of lightning, a primal scream on the page. He was so blinded by his own discovery, so desperate to anoint himself the kingmaker, that he didn't see the careful architecture of the trap being built around him. The call from Eugene's agent to Lena came a week later. Lena, with Isabella Rossi on the line listening silently, played her part to perfection. She was grateful, overwhelmed, but she was also a serious artist. She insisted on having her own counsel review the contract. Eugene's agent, a slick operator named Julian, was initially annoyed, but Eugene, when he heard, was delighted. She has spirit. He'd boomed down the phone to Lena. That's good. You need to be tough in this business. The negotiations were a quiet, brutal war fought over email and phone calls. As predicted, Julian and Pantheon's legal team balked at Isabella's custom clauses. They called the rights reversion clause unprecedented and insane. This was where Carol's inside information became critical. She called me one evening, her voice low. "They're ready to walk away," she said. "The publisher thinks the girl is getting bad advice, but Eugene is going ballistic. He's threatening to pull his own next novel if they don't sign her. He's calling it an issue of artistic integrity. He's doing our work for us," I whispered, a cold wave of satisfaction washing over me. In the end, Eugene's ego won. He got on the phone with the head of the publishing house, a man he'd known for 30 years, and he screamed at him. He staked his entire relationship with the company on this deal. Pantheon, faced with losing their multi-million-dollar cash cow, caved. They agreed to everything: the non-recoupable advance, the acceleration clause tied to his own delivery date, and the insane, unprecedented rights reversion clause. Julian, Eugene's agent, was furious at being sidelined, but he was forced to go along with it. The deal was signed. Lena received the first installment of her advance, $250,000. The money appeared in a new bank account that I had helped her set up, an account Eugene knew nothing about, and then the victory tour began. Eugene paraded Lena around the New York literary scene like a prize he had won. He took her to parties, introduced her to critics, and gushed about her talent to anyone who would listen. He bought her expensive dinners and designer clothes, grooming her for her new role. He even rented a small chic apartment for her in the city, a love nest disguised as a writer's garret. Through it all, Lena was magnificent. She was deferential in public, letting him soak up the glory. In private, she would call me and we would laugh until we cried. "He's explaining my own book to me, Mom," she said one night, her voice thick with mirth. "He just told me my main character represents the fragmentation of the postmodern female identity. I think he got that from one of his own old reviews." While he was building her up, he was systematically trying to tear me down. The divorce proceedings were ugly. He fought me on everything, claiming his sudden financial libations to Lena meant he couldn't afford a fair settlement. His texts to me were a stream of petty grievances and accusations. "You have no idea what it costs to launch a real literary career, Shirley. You and your paperback thrillers. I'm mortgaging my future for art. You're just hoarding your little nest egg. This is all your fault. If you had been more supportive, more ambitious, I wouldn't have had to look for inspiration elsewhere." I saved every single message. Each one was a drop of fuel on the fire. The first real crack in his facade appeared about 3 months after the deal was signed. The second installment of Lena's advance was due, and the money was to be drawn against his quarterly royalty statement. But his last book was underperforming, and the numbers weren't there. He had to liquidate a stock portfolio to cover the payment. I knew this because our financial advisor, a man we had shared for 15 years, called me in a panic. "Shirley, I have to advise you, as part of your divorce settlement, that Eugene's finances are becoming dangerously over-leveraged," he'd said, his voice strained. "This guarantee he signed for this young writer, It's a millstone around his neck. He's cash poor. I've never seen him like this. The panic was beginning to set in for Eugene, too. He started calling Lena at all hours, demanding to see pages of her second book. He wanted to control her process, to ensure his investment was safe. This was the moment we had prepared for. Lena, coached by me, began to gently but firmly push back. Eugene, I need my space to create, she'd tell him, her voice full of artistic anguish. You're the one who taught me that the muse can't be forced. This isn't about the muse, Lena. This is about a contract. He'd shout, his frustration mounting. I can't work under this kind of pressure, she'd say, her voice trembling. You're stifling me. He was caught in his own trap. He couldn't be the controlling tyrant without destroying the very image of the sensitive, nurturing mentor he had so carefully crafted. He would back off, seething, and then the cycle would repeat a week later. He was a man wrestling with a ghost of his own making. The silent takeover was well underway. He was losing control of his protégé, his finances, and his own narrative, and he didn't even know who was pulling the strings. The power shift began subtly. It wasn't a dramatic, overnight coup, but a slow, inexorable tilting of the scales. It began with the publication of Lena's novel, which we had titled Echo Chamber. It landed in the world not with a whimper, but with a roar. The book was, by all objective measures, a triumph. It was the product of Lena's raw talent and my seasoned, strategic guidance. The story of a young, brilliant female composer navigating a world dominated by older, predatory male mentors resonated deeply with the cultural moment. The reviews were ecstatic. The New York Times called it a stunning debut that is both timeless and breathtakingly modern. A famous actress optioned the film rights within the first month. Lena was on the cover of literary magazines. She was a guest on podcasts. She was, in short, a phenomenon. And Eugene was right there, basking in the reflected glory. At the book launch party, a lavish affair he insisted on throwing at the Players Club, he was in his element. He stood with his arm draped possessively around Lena's shoulders, accepting congratulations as if he had written the book himself. I knew it from the moment I read the first page, he proclaimed to a circle of fawning critics. The girl is a vessel, a pure conduit for the sublime. I just had to help her open the channel. I was there. I had come with Carol. I stood at the back of the room, sipping a glass of champagne, watching the man who had destroyed our marriage congratulate himself on his own foresight. He saw me across the room, and for a moment his smile tightened. He gave me a curt, dismissive nod, as if I were a distant, slightly embarrassing acquaintance. He had no idea I was the architect of the entire evening. He had no idea that Lena's eyes, over the rim of her own champagne glass, kept finding mine, a silent acknowledgement, a shared secret in the glittering, crowded room. The book sold well, very well. It hit the bestseller lists and stayed there for weeks. But here was the beautiful, vicious math of our plan. It didn't sell well enough. The advance Eugene had secured was so astronomically high, so far beyond the norms for a debut novel, that even with stellar sales, it failed to earn out. It didn't even come close to covering the $500,000 guarantee. The first official notice from Pantheon's accounting department arrived in Eugene's inbox at the end of the fiscal quarter. I knew because Carol's friend in legal had forwarded her a blind copy. It was a dry, formal document detailing the sales figures, the advance paid, and the significant shortfall. The letter concluded by informing Mr. Blackwood that per the terms of his guarantor agreement, the advance for his own next novel, The Alabaster Grin, would be reduced by the outstanding amount. That was when Eugene's private panic began to escalate into a full-blown crisis. His next advance wasn't just reduced, it was essentially wiped out. The money he had been counting on to maintain his lifestyle, to pay his lawyers, to keep the mortgage on our main house afloat, was gone. It had been funneled directly to Lena. His attempts at counter-manipulation became desperate. He started trying to claw back control. He sent Lena a series of increasingly frantic emails, demanding creative control over her second book, outlining plots, and even sending her rewritten scenes. He was trying to turn her into his ghostwriter, to literally write his way out of the hole he had dug for himself. Lena, following our script, responded with polite but unyielding resistance. She framed it as artistic integrity. Eugene, these are beautiful scenes, but this isn't Clara's voice. I have to stay true to the character we created. It's what you always taught me. He then tried to badmouth her to their shared editor at Pantheon, a desperate, clumsy move. He called the editor, claiming Lena was difficult and losing her way. The editor, a man who now had a runaway bestseller and a budding literary star on his hands, was not receptive. She seems fine to me, Jean, the editor had said coolly, a conversation Carol relayed to me with glee. The sales are fantastic. The reviews are a dream. Whatever she's doing, I suggest you let her keep doing it. He had made her untouchable. He had spent months telling the world she was a genius. He couldn't now claim she was incompetent without looking like a fool. He had built her fortress with his own hands, and now he was locked outside. The final, most pathetic stage of his desperation was turning to me. He called me for the first time in months. His voice, stripped of its usual booming confidence, was thin and reedy. "Shirley," he said, trying for a tone of weary camaraderie, "we need to talk about Lena." I was sitting on the deck of my new, much smaller rental cottage, overlooking a quiet cove. I felt a profound sense of calm. "What about her, Eugene? She's out of control," he said, his voice rising. "She's not listening to me. The second book is meandering. She's going to squander the momentum. This is a crucial moment in her career, in our career. I thought perhaps you could talk to her. You're an agent. You know how to handle difficult talent." The audacity of it was breathtaking. He was asking me, the woman he'd left, to help him manage the woman he'd left me for. "I'm not her agent, Eugene," I said, my voice as placid as the water in front of me. "But you could be," he said, his voice suddenly full of false enthusiasm. "It's a brilliant idea. We could be a team again. You manage her, I mentor her. We'll all benefit. We can guide her to her full potential." He was drowning, and he was trying to use me as a life raft. He was offering me a return to my old role, the sensible, practical woman who cleaned up his messes. "No, thank you, Eugene," I said softly. "My agency is doing very well on its own. And besides, my divorce from you is not yet final. It would be a conflict of interest, wouldn't it?" I could hear the hiss of his frustrated breath on the other end of the line. "You're being deliberately obtuse, Shirley. You know what I'm offering. I'm offering you a way back in." "A way back into what, exactly?" I asked. "A supporting role in the grand theater of your life. I've played that part already." I didn't care for the reviews. I hung up the phone. The power had not just shifted, it had completely reversed. He was the one who was desperate, panicked and trapped, and I was the one who was free. The exodus was nearly complete. He had lost his money, he had lost control of his muse, and his entire literary family, the world that had once worshipped him, was now watching him with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, as his carefully constructed world began to crumble around him. The final confrontation happened on a bleak, rainy afternoon in November. The sky over the coast of Maine was the color of slate, and a cold wind whipped the waves into a frenzy. I was in my office, a small sunlit room I had built for myself in my new cottage, a space that was entirely mine. I was on the phone with a new author, a promising young mystery writer, when I saw Eugene's car pull into my driveway. It was an ambush. I finished my call, my heart beating a slow, steady drum. I was not afraid. I was ready. I had been preparing for this conversation for over a year. He didn't bother to knock. He just opened the door and strode in, his face pale and haggard, his expensive raincoat dripping onto my polished wood floors. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. The booming, confident novelist was gone, replaced by a wet, angry man. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage that was barely contained. He was clutching a sheaf of papers in his hand. Legal documents from the look of them. I'm not sure what you mean, Eugene, I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. I gestured to the puddle forming at his feet. You're dripping on the floor. Don't you play games with me, he roared, slamming the papers down on my desk. Pantheon is calling in my contract. They're saying I'm in breach. They're taking everything. The house. My future royalties. Everything. All because of her. All because of that ridiculous contract you somehow convinced her to sign. I didn't convince her of anything, I said, my voice even. As I recall, you were the one who told her to be a tough negotiator, to protect her art. She just took your advice. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. The pieces were starting to click together in his mind, but they were forming a picture he couldn't comprehend. You knew this would happen. This has your fingerprints all over it. The legal language, the rights reversion. It's the kind of thing you would do. You did this to me. You turned her against me. She doesn't need turning, Eugene, I said, standing up. I walked to the window and looked out at the churning, gray sea. You did that all on your own. You tried to own her, just like you tried to own me. You thought her talent was something you could acquire, like a first edition or a piece of art, a fine addition to your collection. I loved her, he shouted, his voice cracking. I gave her everything. You gave her things. I corrected him, turning back to face him. You gave her money you didn't have, and attention she didn't need. You didn't love her. You loved the idea of her. You loved what she did for your ego. I paused, letting the silence stretch. It was time. Time for the final devastating truth. You never even asked, did you? About her life, about where she came from. He looked confused. What are you talking about? She's from Ohio. Her parents are retired teachers. She told me. She told you what she was supposed to tell you, I said. I walked back to my desk and picked up a framed photograph that I kept facing me. I turned it around and placed it in front of him. It was a picture of me, at 19, holding a newborn baby, wrapped in a hospital blanket. He stared at the photo, then back at my face. A flicker of disbelief, then dawning horror, crossed his features. What is this? He whispered. That is a picture of me and my daughter, I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. The daughter I had to give up for adoption, because I was 19, and alone, and had nothing. The daughter who found me last year. The daughter you know as Lena. The color drained from his face. He staggered back a step, his hand going to his chest, as if he'd been physically struck. He sank into the client chair opposite my desk, his mouth opening and closing silently. All the arrogance, all the fury, all the bluster, evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a hollow, shattered man. No, he breathed. No, it's not possible. Oh, it's very possible, I said. I sat down, the power dynamic now absolute. I was the one behind the desk. He was the one supplicating. You were so busy anointing yourself as her creator. You never once stopped to think that she might already have one. You praised her raw talent, comparing it to my stagnant career. Well, you were right. Her talent is raw and real, and it comes from me. The stagnant woman you cast aside. I let him absorb the enormity of it. The whole grand narrative of his life's brilliant third act, the discovery, the muse, the passionate affair, was a lie. A carefully constructed trap, laid by the two women he had underestimated more than anyone else in the world. My money, he stammered. My reputation, my publisher. They're all going to the daughter you never knew I had. I finished for him. My daughter. And let me tell you what's going to happen next. Lena, having been such a success, is now a free agent. Thanks to the rights reversion clause you forced Pantheon to accept, she is taking her multi-million-dollar franchise, Echo Chamber, and its sequel, to a new publisher. I believe Marcus Thorne is offering her a very, very generous home. Pantheon is, of course, devastated. And they blame you entirely. They are suing you for breach of contract and for the financial losses you incurred. You have no money, Eugene. You have no publisher, and you have no protege. He just stared at me, his eyes vacant with shock. The great novelist, the master of words, had nothing to say. He had been so consumed with writing his own story that he never realized he was just a minor character in mine. A villain, to be precise. And his chapter was over. It was never just about the revenge, Eugene, I said, my voice softening slightly. It was about justice. It was about taking the power you stole from me and giving it to her. The family you destroyed is being replaced by the one you never knew existed. I stood up. I think you should go now. He didn't move for a long moment. Then slowly, like an old man, he pushed himself to his feet. He didn't look at me again. He turned and walked out of my office, out of my cottage, out of my life, leaving the damning legal papers and the puddle of rainwater behind on my floor. I watched him go, and I felt not a surge of triumph, but a quiet, profound sense of peace. The storm had finally passed. In the end, it really wasn't about the money, or the house, or even the revenge, not entirely. It was about narrative. For 25 years, Eugene controlled my story. He was the protagonist, and I was, at best, a supporting character whose role got smaller with each passing year. He had the power to define me, to label me stagnant, to write me out of my own life. The most satisfying part of this whole thing wasn't watching him lose his fortune. It was watching him lose control of the story. He thought he was the author, but he was just the subject. Today life is quiet. And it's a beautiful quiet. Lena and I bought a small house together on the coast, not far from my cottage. It's filled with our books, not his. She's working on her second novel, and it's even better than the first. I've taken on a few new clients for my agency, writers with unique voices that I believe in. We're not just a mother and daughter who found each other. We're partners. We're a team. We took the wreckage of the past and built something new and strong from it. Sometimes, I wonder about the morality of what we did. Was it a cold, calculated, manipulative act? Yes. Without a doubt. We used his ego against him. We laid a trap, and we watched him walk right into it. Some people might say we went too far, that the punishment didn't fit the crime. But then I remember all the years of quiet humiliation, the casual dismissals, the slow and steady erosion of my sense of self. I think about the 19-year-old girl who had to give up her child because she had no support, no power, and no voice. And I realize we didn't go too far. We just went far enough to get our voices back. He built his castle on my foundation. We just took back the stones, with interest, and built a home for the daughter he never knew I had. So I want to ask you, what would you have done? Would you have walked away quietly? Or would you have rewritten the story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read them all, and if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or had your story taken from you, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel, because my story is proof that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who is writing the ending.